Edmund Kemper. The woman who gave him life insisted no girl would ever love him, so he ensured they could never depart. At the age of 8, Edmund Kemper's mother began a nightly ritual of locking him in the cellar, claiming it was for his sister's safety. She frequently insulted him, calling him a freak loudly enough to penetrate the walls. She often told him he was a mirror image of his father, a comparison intended to wound. By 10, Kemper had buried the household cat alive, only to exhume it, decapitate it, and display its head on a stake. At 14, he fled in search of his father, only to find he had a new family and no room for his son. He was sent to live with his grandparents on a secluded ranch in California, where his grandmother mirrored his mother's behavior through relentless berating and dominance. On August 27, 1964, 15-year-old Edmund shot his grandmother in the head. He then gunned down his grandfather upon his return home. When investigators inquired about his motive, Kemper explained he simply wanted to experience killing his grandmother, and he killed his grandfather to spare him the shock of the discovery. After 5 years in a mental institution, clinicians deemed him cured and returned him to his mother's custody. Hostility flared immediately. Their shouting matches were so intense that neighbors often alerted the authorities. His mother frequently told him he was pathetic and that no college student would ever find him attractive. Between 1972 and 1973, Kemper kidnapped and murdered 6 young female hitchhikers. These weren't random targets. They were students at UC Santa Cruz, the very institution where his mother worked, and the type of women she claimed would never want him. After one murder, he buried the victim's head in his mother's garden, facing her bedroom window, remarking that she always desired people to look up to her. Finally, on April 20th, 1973, Kemper reached his tipping point, bludgeoning his mother to death with a hammer in her sleep. He decapitated her and used her head for dart practice before surrendering to the police. The spree ended when he finally liquidated the source of his existence, Jeffrey Dahmer. When Jeffrey Dahmer turned 18, he was abandoned by both parents. His father moved out, and his mother disappeared with his younger brother without leaving a way to contact her. Left alone in a vacant house, Jeffrey later identified this as the point where his life shattered. To outsiders, his upbringing in suburban Ohio seemed standard, but the household was decaying from within. His mother was a pill-dependent wreck struggling with mental illness, while his father was consumed by his chemistry doctorate as his marriage failed. Their constant screaming arguments left their eldest son unnoticed as he drifted away. By the age of 10, Jeffrey was harvesting roadkill, stripping away the meat to keep the skeletons. His father mistook this for a scientific hobby, even instructing his son on how to chemically preserve the bones. He ignored the fact that Jeffrey spent his solitude in a shed filled with skulls and formaldehyde. By 14, he was drinking hard liquor before class. Despite failing grades, no one helped him. By the time of the divorce, Jeffrey had internalized a dark philosophy. People always leave, and the only way to stop them is to make it impossible for them to go. From 1978 to 1991, Dahmer took the lives of 17 young men. He would drug and choke them, keeping their remains as long as possible to pose, photograph, and sleep near them. He later claimed he harbored no desire to inflict pain. He simply couldn't bear the isolation. He believed the only way to keep his companions was to ensure they were incapable of leaving. In 1994, at age 34, Dahmer was murdered by a fellow inmate. His parents had spent years debating whose fault his pathology was, but ultimately, they had both left him behind, leaving a void he could never fill. John Wayne Gacy. His father labeled him a moron, a slur, and a total disappointment. John Wayne Gacy's youth was a desperate, failed quest for his father's validation. His father was a violent, alcoholic laborer who routinely abused the family. At 4, John was beaten for messing with car parts. At 9, he was sexually abused by a family acquaintance but stayed silent out of fear his father would blame him. He grew up believing he was the cause of every problem. Gacy tried to compensate by being a model citizen. He excelled in school, volunteered, ran a profitable business, and even entertained sick children as Pogo the Clown. Yet, his father's disdain remained unchanged. A shift occurred in 1966 when Gacy, then a married father managing Iowa restaurants, received a visit from his parents. For the first time, his father shook his hand and admitted he was wrong. 3 years later, his father passed away. Gacy, then imprisoned for assaulting an employee, collapsed at the news and was denied permission to attend the funeral. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy killed at least 33 young men. He would entice them with job offers, trap them with a magic handcuff trick, and subject them to hours of torture before strangling them with a rope. He shoved 26 of the bodies into the crawl space under his home. By the time police arrived, the smell of death had been drifting through his vents for years. Gacy was unrepentant, mocking his victims at trial and blaming a second personality named Jack. He was executed in 1994, never having proved his worth to the man he feared most, leaving behind dozens of families grieving children killed by a man obsessed with his own inadequacy. Albert Fish. Faced with poverty, his mother gave him up. Following his father's fatal heart attack when Albert was 5, his mother, unable to provide, placed him in a DC orphanage. It was intended as a rescue, but it forged a predator. The institution was brutal, with staff regularly whipping children to the point of bleeding while forcing others to observe. While this was meant to instill discipline, it sparked a dark thrill in Albert. He realized he enjoyed the pain, both his own and that of others. His mind fused suffering with pleasure permanently. By the time he returned to his mother 5 years later, he was fundamentally broken. As an adult, Fish sought extreme sensations, once embedding 29 needles into his own body. He practiced self-mutilation with various tools and fire. However, his own agony wasn't enough. He craved the cries of children. Between 1924 and 1928, he killed at least 3 youths, dismembering and consuming them. He even wrote a horrific letter to a victim's mother, detailing how he prepared her daughter as a meal. Doctors found 18 distinct sexual deviations in Fish, a record in medical history. He claimed his actions were divine sacrifices. Though the jury recognized his insanity, they sentenced him to death. In 1936, he reportedly helped the executioner attach the electrodes to his own body. His final writing was so obscene, his own attorney suppressed it. The boy, abandoned for financial reasons, had transformed into one of the most depraved figures in American history. Henry Lee Lucas. His mother dressed him as a girl before selling him into abuse. Born in 1936 in a one-room Virginia shack, Henry Lee Lucas was raised by Viola, a prostitute who forced him to watch her work. Resistance resulted in brutal beatings. More disturbing was that she forced him to wear dresses and long hair for years so she could sell him to her own clients. His father, a double amputee alcoholic, was powerless to intervene and eventually froze to death in the snow while trying to escape the house. The physical trauma was relentless. At 7, a blow from his mother left him comatose for days. At 10, his brother stabbed him in the face. The eye eventually exploded after a teacher accidentally hit it, leading to its removal. Henry grew up believing he was a disposable object. In 1960, during an argument over his mother's care, he stabbed her to death. He served time, but when released due to prison overcrowding, he warned guards he wasn't fit for society. Within hours of his release, he committed another murder right outside the prison. While he was convicted of 11 killings, he claimed responsibility for hundreds, though many were fabrications. Regardless of the final count, the reality remains. Long before Henry Lee Lucas took a life, his mother had already destroyed the person he could have become.